As Christ followers, it's our intention to follow. The term Christ follower describes who we are and what we do, or what we intend to do, what we desire to do, to follow Jesus. Have you ever changed your mind about something or switched teams? It's hard to do, especially once you have made a public statement, I am this. And now it's like, this isn't really working for me anymore. I'm going to switch teams and be that. Now, real quick, and I know some of you really hate this about me. I do have one flaw that some of you have pointed out, and I don't think it's Pittsburgh. And so right from the very youngest, I was born into Steeler land. And I grew up with, well, I was a little kid, but I had these posters on my wall of Terry Bradshaw. Do you remember that guy? And Franco Harris and Jack Lambert and Mean Joe Green, all those guys, they were my heroes when I was a kid. And somehow that got into me. And so we moved to Ohio, northern Ohio, Browns country. Couldn't change. I'm sorry. I wouldn't do it. Couldn't do it. I heard there's another team in Ohio. I don't remember their name. But anyway, then I went off to college in Indiana. In Indiana, there are the Colts. In fact, in the summertime, when I was in seminary, in the summertime, I would get home from work and I would go home to my balcony and have dinner. And 20 yards away was the practice fields where the Colts practiced their summer. And it was great, but I couldn't root for them. Really? The Colts? No. Then our first assignment was in Texas. So we moved to Texas. And the Oilers were gone, but we went to Houston, and so there were Cowboy fans who gagged me. Cowboys. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. Then we moved to Kansas City. Yeah, right? Any Kansas City fans? I hated the Chiefs. Hated. Here's why. Just like when it really rains here, our crowd is small. When the Chiefs play, nobody came to church because they all went to the game. And so I thought the Chiefs were of the devil. I couldn't root for them. And then we moved to Washington, home of the Seahawks, right? You really think I'm about to confess that I switched teams, don't you? Well, hang on a minute. Something happened a few weeks ago that you need to understand. I didn't choose. But there's a certain quarterback named Russell Wilson who used to be the quarterback for the Seahawks. Russell Wilson is now the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Right? I have spent 12 years of my life hating that guy. Rooting against him, hoping he would fumble, hoping he would throw an interception, hoping he would get snapped in half. All of those good things, that was me. And suddenly, I'm the only one in this room who loves Russell Wilson. Anybody else still love that guy? I'm his biggest fan in this room. He switched teams. I guess I switched allegiance. I don't even know. So, we're almost at the end stretch of this series, Unstoppable. One more week to go. But Jesus had lived and taught and died on the cross and rose from the dead, and then he placed the church in the hands of his followers. But there was incredible resistance to this message of Jesus that was going out, that was unstoppable. But there was a man named Saul, and we read about him last week, who was trying to stop and persecute and destroy this church. And this Saul had an encounter with Jesus. And we're going to look at that very briefly today. Acts chapter 9. Acts 9, verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. So he went to the high priest. He requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus, asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any followers of the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. As he was approaching Damascus on this mission, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. And the voice replied, "I am Jesus, the one who you are persecuting." Saul thought he knew God. Saul thought he was serving God by killing these Christ followers. Saul thought that he was on Yahweh's side. And then he had an encounter with Jesus. And he hears this voice, "Why are you persecuting me?" "Who are you, Lord? Who are you?" This encounter would change Saul. And Saul would be renamed Paul. And he would become an apostle. And he would work to expand this message of Jesus everywhere he went. And he would plant churches, and he would strengthen the churches, and he would suffer the persecution from the leaders, the religious leaders of the day. But Saul's knowledge of God moved from understanding the scriptures to knowing the voice of God. And that's a huge place, a huge shift, because we can know the scriptures pretty well without knowing the voice of God. He knew the voice of Jesus. So we pick up in Acts now, chapter 16. And as we flip to 16, a lot has happened between chapter 9 and chapter 16. Now, Paul is on his second journey. He's out there, and he's planting churches, and he's looking for leaders, and he's doing great things for Jesus. Acts 16, verse 1. Paul went first to Derbe, and then to Lystra, where there was a young disciple named Timothy. His mother was a Jewish believer, but his father was a Greek. So Paul would pour into Timothy and give him responsibility in the church. Now skip down to verse 4. Then they went from town to town, instructing the believers to follow the decisions made by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in their faith and grew larger every day. Next, Paul and Silas traveled through the area of Phrygia and Galatia, because the Holy Spirit had prevented them from preaching the word in the province of Asia at the time. Then, coming to the borders of Mysia, they headed north for the province of Bithynia. But again, the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them to go there. So instead, they went through Mysia to the seaport of Troas. That night, Paul had a vision. A man from Macedonia in northern Greece was standing there, pleading with him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." So we decided to leave for Macedonia at once, having concluded that God was calling us to preach the good news there. Saul had switched teams. He wasn't a Seahawk anymore. Have I ever told you that God's a Steeler fan? I will never say that out loud. I just did. No, I didn't. Can you erase that? Sorry. Saul has switched teams, and now he was the Apostle Paul. And he had gone to strengthen the church. But as Paul went along, he decided the best way to go is north and east. And so he tried to head north and east into Asia. In Asia, what we're talking about in Asia in the scriptures, this is actually what is today modern-day Turkey. It's that region of the world. It's modern-day Turkey. He wanted to head north and east. But as he headed in that direction, the Spirit of Jesus said, "No, don't go that way." Now, we don't know what the Spirit did to warn him not to go in that way or to stop him from heading in that direction. We don't know what exactly happened, but we know the scriptures tell us that the Spirit of Jesus said no. And so he went a little bit further north, and as he's going along, he starts to veer off to the east again. And again, the Spirit of Jesus says, "No. No, that is not the direction I want you to go in. I want you to go in a different direction." And so he has this vision of a man in northern Macedonia saying, "Come, help us." And they determined that this is the Spirit of God saying, go north and west. Go north and west instead of north and east. I don't know why he wanted to go east. Maybe he thought it made more sense. Maybe he thought his message would translate better there. Maybe he thought that was the place where the message was the ripest and he would go there. But for some reason, the Spirit said, no, not that direction. Move in this other way. Sometimes we, as Christ followers, sometimes we get it wrong. We think God is leading in one direction, but God isn't. And the Spirit stops us, if you will. It's funny, though, following Jesus is more art than science. I mean, we want it to be spelled out for us. We want it to be a formula that we can write. We want it to just be, sometimes we want to open up the scriptures and go, boop, oh, here's what God wants me to do. I mean, that's what we want, but it's not that. It's more art than science as we sense what doors God might be opening in our lives, as we sense what the Spirit might be tugging at our hearts, as we look at our own passions, as we look at the opportunities, at the things that pull on our heartstrings. One of the reasons, when people often say things like, well, God told me this, and God told me that, I get a little bit leery every time that happens, every time. There was a person, we were looking for a worship pastor once, and there was a person who said, well, God told me I'm your next worship pastor. And I threw away the resume. You know why? God didn't tell me. There was a person who told me, God told me I'm your next youth pastor. I threw away the resume. Why? Because God didn't tell me. And so just because someone said, God told me this, I just kind of, when someone says that, because here's the way God speaks to me. And now God might communicate with you. I'm not saying that's impossible. You might have a direct line to God like that. But to me, it's more like, I think God's leading me in this direction. I kind of sense that maybe God is guiding me over in this direction. And so I move in the direction I think God is guiding me. That tends to be my process. I kind of move in the direction of the doors he's opening or what I sense might be happening. And now that said, I believe God does guide us. Absolutely. I believe his Spirit whispers to us. And we can catch little, and the better we are able to tune into the frequency of God, the more message we'll get from his Spirit's whisper. And sometimes we get it, and sometimes we miss it. But many of us, as Christ followers, we are seeking his direction for us. We're seeking to please him, to follow him, to go in the direction he's leading us. And so we ask questions like, God, what do you want me to do? God, what is your will? God, where are you leading? We ask those questions. And there have been a lot of times that I've said, God, where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? And I've heard nothing. Crickets. What do you do then? Because a mile off course is a 2-mile mistake, right? So if I move off in the direction 1 mile, and then I finally I missed my exit. I finally figure out I missed my exit, right? I'm supposed to turn. Now I'm a mile down the road. I have to turn around and head back a mile. It's a 2-mile mistake. But that's not the way it always works as we follow Jesus. Sometimes we're off a mile, and we can find a way. Jesus has a way of helping us find a way from where we are to where he's trying to get us to go. We're not always able to retrace our step. It's like, oftentimes we're afraid that we're going to take a wrong turn. We're listening for God. We're trying to follow, and we're afraid we're going to take a wrong turn, and so we stop. We're afraid that we're going to get so far off course, and so we stop right where we are. You know, it's harder to move an object that is sitting still. A lot of you are way too young for this, and I feel bad for you. You're so young. I feel bad because there used to be a time when you could buy a car that didn't have power steering. Does anybody remember those kind of cars? And so a car, you could buy it with power steering or without power steering. And if it didn't have power steering, you had to crank it. Like at least when you're sitting still and you're trying to turn, you had to crank that wheel. Remember that? That's why our arms were so strong way back then. We didn't have to go to the gym. We just had to turn the wheel, right? Back in the olden days. But anyway, and the earth was more flat too, so it was different. But trying to move a car that had no power steering, you had to really work that wheel to get it to move as you're sitting still. Now, once you're moving, it's easy. It's just like a power steering. It's easy. But when it's sitting still, it was very hard to do. So we, as Christ followers, when we're in motion, it seems like it's easier for God to change our direction in the way that he wants us to go. So Paul is trying to do something good. Paul is trying to follow Jesus. Paul is trying to spread this message of the gospel, and he's moving along, and Jesus says, don't turn that way, turn this. And he's moving, but God is redirecting him as he goes. So often, though, we're afraid that we're going to move off in the wrong direction, or we're afraid of this. I missed the turn 6 years ago. God was guiding me along, and I missed that turn 6 years ago, and because I missed that turn 6 years ago, I will never get to the place that Jesus is trying to take me. What am I going to do now? Because I can't go back in time 6 years. Does anybody remember 6 years ago? Man, life seemed so easy 6 years ago. I can't go back. I have as much access to 6 years ago as I have to 100 years ago. No access at all. And so here we are trying to move forward. And oftentimes we're afraid to move. And so we stop and we wait. God, I'm going to wait right here until I hear from you. And we wait. And we're still and we wait on God instead of moving along and allowing God to change our course as we move. Speaking of moving in the wrong direction, I found an old blog post that I'd written years ago. In fact, it was 12 years ago or so. I'd been here at the church for 1 year at the time, and I was trying to process my previous assignment. I was a church planter in the Kansas City metro area, and this church plant that we had started, Sacred Journey, failed miserably. It didn't launch the way we had intended for it to launch. And so here I was now in this new assignment in Walla Walla trying to process that whole thing, and I wrote it on my blog. Did any of you read that blog? Yeah, probably not. I don't even remember telling you that I had a blog. I don't know if I did. But here are some things that I learned that I wrote in this old blog. And you can't find it anymore. It's no longer out there. I quit paying for it. But I wrote this thinking about Sacred Journey, this church that we tried to start. I wrote, failure is not final. Okay, so those words are John Maxwell's words, but they're also my words now. It's an odd thing to pull the plug on the thing that you believed God was leading you to do. To actually realize that your dream wasn't going to take shape. To realize that a lot of money and more than a year of your life has been burned. But you wake up the next day and realize that the stillbirth of a church plant does not mean the death of a calling. Being resilient really is a choice. Besides, I would rather try something big than try nothing at all. Imagine to leap with no net, hit the ground hard, and find you're still alive. I always believed that church should be more than this. In fact, every church planter who has ever lived believes that. Church should be more than this. That's why they plant a church, because they believe that it should be different. I'd always believed the church should be more than this. I would look at the shortcomings of the church and the huge frustrations of trying to move an established organization forward, even though it didn't want to be moved. Part of the belief led me toward church planting. In retrospect, I learned no church really has it right for more than a moment at a time. Churches, are all flawed and often deeply. But there are perfect moments in a church. And it is those perfect moments that powerful things happen in those perfect moments. I also learned it's possible to have the favor of God on your life and yet not on your work. Maybe that sounds weird. Sacred Journey, the church, was a beautiful dream. And I'm going to skip some of this because it's kind of flowery and stuff like that. Not everyone who says they're with you is really with you. Some people who I thought would go with us to the end got off well before the beginning. And some people I thought were in our corner were rooting for us to get knocked out. We even had people working to undercut us and all kinds of stuff. I feel sorry for them. It's funny, as I look back on that failed church plant, did I miss a step somewhere along the way? I thought God was guiding me in that direction to do this thing in this place, and it didn't happen. Have any of you ever experienced that? You thought you were doing the will of God only to discover nothing. It didn't work. Was it a misstep? Was God trying to teach me something? What was that all about? As Christ followers, sometimes we find ourselves struggling to know God's will for our lives. And so we ask questions like, God, where do you want me to go? God, what do you want me to do? God, am I in your will? I want to be in your will. I want to serve you in this way. I want to place my resources in the direction you want my resources, all that stuff. We can even find ourselves paralyzed, waiting for God to speak to us. And days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and finally years go by, and we haven't moved. We haven't done anything. And we fear, I missed my divine calling. I missed my opportunity. It was 10 years ago. Do you really think that God can't move you where he wants you anyway? Do you really believe that? So you're going to take the long way there, right? You're going to take the hard road. You're going to take the back road. It's fine. If God is in control, he'll get you where he's trying to get you. So I've pondered this thought in my faith journey. What if asking God to show us his will is not the best question? What if that's just not even the best question at all? What if there's a better question, a more effective question, a more powerful question? What if the question we really need to answer is to know the heart of God? God, help me know your heart. Help me understand what makes your heart beat. Help me know your heart. Because if we know the heart of God, 9 times out of 10, we can guess what he wants. 9 times out of 10, and yes, I know there's specific callings in certain moments and all that kind of stuff, but if I know the heart of a person, okay, I've been married to Leslie for like 50 years, right? Don't tell her I said that. But I know her really well. Now, she'll shock me sometimes. There's things about her that where did that come from, right? But I've been married to her for a long time, and I know a lot about her. I know what she's afraid of and what makes her passionate, and I know the things that if we walk into the moment, I might say, she would hate that. She would love that. You know, here's what she would think about that, because I know her so well. What if you knew the heart of God better than you know the heart of your spouse? What if you understood God in that way? Or Jesus, let me say it that way. What if you understood the heart of Jesus better than you understand the heart of your spouse? When you know the heart of Jesus, you tend to know what his desire is in a certain situation. But I'm so mad, and I want to lash out. And Jesus says, right? That's not the right response, Jim. Or I'm afraid and I don't want to do that. And Jesus says, have no fear. I don't want to. And Jesus says, yeah, but you should. Knowing God's heart gives us an innate ability to guess the next step that he would have us take. Knowing his heart gives us an innate ability to guess the next step he would have us take. Sometimes you're going to miss it. Sometimes you're not going to put it all together just right. But you could experiment and give it a shot. You're in motion, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion, right? And so, yes, you might be slightly off course, and Jesus can come along and knock you back on course. It's fine. And correct your course. But knowing the heart of Jesus is only half of the puzzle. There's another half of the puzzle, and that is knowing your heart. It's funny, I'm a peacemaker at heart, and so in understanding what a peacemaker is and some of the definition of a peacemaker, and peacemakers are really good at understanding other people, but they're not very good at understanding their own hearts. And so I struggle with my own feelings, and somebody will ask me, so how do you feel about that? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know yet. Let me think about it a while. But knowing your own heart is the other half of the battle. The way that God shaped you, the passions that he put in you, your story along the way, all of those things help direct us as we seek to follow him, because there may be opportunities on your path that you shouldn't take, that you should actually say no to so you can say yes to something else. Now, at the same time, if I ask you, always say yes, please. Just kidding. So you missed a turn. Big deal. Because if you're a Christ follower and you missed a turn, he can reroute you, right? He'll reroute you and get you moving in the right direction because you're seeking to follow and you're open to the guiding of the Spirit. But knowing the heart of God might be the single most important factor in determining God's will for you and for me. So our task isn't always to know God's will, but our task is to know the heart of God. It's to know the heart of Jesus. Besides, most of the things in life are up to us anyway. Did you know that? Most of the opportunities that come your way, they're up to you. There are some things, though, that God is trying to guide you in. There are some moments, there's some directions that he will guide you if you let him. But most of it, it's kind of up to you. So back to our text. That night, Paul had a vision. A man from Macedonia in northern Greece was standing there pleading with him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." So we decided to leave from Macedonia at once, having concluded that God was calling us to preach the good news there. What about us? You, me, strive to know the heart of God. Strive to know. How can you know somebody else's heart? How can you do that? Spend time with Jesus. That's how you get to know his heart. You spend time with Jesus. You read the New Testament. Read the stories of Jesus, because the writers wrote those stories because those were the things they needed to pass on to us so that we would understand who Jesus is, so we would understand his heart. Read the stories of Jesus, read the words of Jesus, read the thoughts of the people who walked with Jesus. That's the New Testament. Read it, and read it again, and let it drip into your life. Know the heart of God. Second thing, stay in motion. Don't stop. Don't wait. Stay in motion. Try something new and expect that God is going to redirect you. Jesus is going to redirect you as you move forward, and allow him to do it. Hey, would you stand and let's sing together in response.